Welcome, I'm Paige Stover, here today with Dr. Catherine Seifert. Dr. Seifert is the author of the award-winning book, How Children Become Violent. Dr. Seifert, as I was reading through your book, you talk about a concept that, as a layperson, I'll have to admit, I was not familiar with. That's the idea of attachment and then the failure to attach and how that relates to violence among children and adults.
Okay, well, let's look at attachment then first. And so attachment is the heart-to-heart attachment relationship that forms between an infant and its caregiver.
Like a bonding.
Like a bonding, the early bonding of the infant. That does two things. It is necessary for the brain to develop and for the patterning of how to form relationships to form in the infant. It also is necessary to keep the mother close in order to take care of the needs of the baby. So if the baby's needs are taken care of, the baby is satisfied, and thus that supports the warm relationship between the baby and the mother or the caregiver. And so that's necessary to form the basis of all relationships for the rest of the person's life.
So you're suggesting the propensity for violence could start as early as the first few days of life?
Absolutely, because it is essential to have, biologically, it's essential to have that warm, comforting, nurturing bond between infant and caregiver to form a basis for trust, which is the basis of all relationships. And so it can start right from the beginning. It has to be chronic for it to be so damaging that the child can't form other relationships. But if it's chronic, it will be severely damaging, and the child will not know how to make relationships with other people.
Now, how do you define chronic? What is chronic versus what is not chronic?
And chronic would be if you have a mother that misses picking up a crying baby one day, that's not going to damage the infant. But if you have a mother who's chronically depressed or substance abusing and doesn't pick up the baby when he's crying every day, and doesn't change his diaper when it needs to be changed, and doesn't feed him when he needs to be fed, and does it every day on a constant basis, that's chronic and extremely damaging. And the more often it happens, the more damaging it's going to be. So if it happens for a few days and the baby's taken away, might not be too damaging. But if it goes on for a year or two, it's going to be extremely damaging.
I see. So you're describing the failure to attach in the earliest, the infant stages of life. But in your research, you actually identify 3 critical developmental stages where a child can fail to attach in your language.
Correct. And so in infancy, that's the first stage. And the idea there is that they attach to family members right in their home. But once they become adolescents, the developmental job of adolescence is to attach to a peer group, to become part of other adolescents and their groups, and to be social with them and learn to interact in groups. So that is the second opportunity that we have to attach to people outside of our home. So our sphere of attachments is getting larger in adolescence. Children can fail to attach at the adolescent stage when they're bullied and when they're rejected by their peer group and they become withdrawn from their peer group and fail to attach to those in their peer group. That's stage 2. At stage 3, our development is twofold. One is to find meaningful life experience of some kind, and most people attach to a significant other, a friend, or a mate, and that becomes the developmental job. If this is not accomplished, that's the third opportunity to attach to another human being. And when they fail to do that at that age, that's problematic. The real problem is if you have somebody that fails to attach at all 3 levels or 2 of the 3 levels, then you have somebody who's really in trouble.
I see. So if I'm understanding you correctly then, in the language of the layperson, there are risk factors at all 3 of these developmental stages that you as the professional are able to identify as signifiers. And then if there's a multiplicity of these risk factors, the probability for violence is much greater.
Right. And the more of the risk factors a young person has, the more likely it is that they will be violent. And so if you just have a couple, then the likelihood is low. If you have 5, 6, then the likelihood is moderate. Maybe it's 50-50. And if you have 8, 9, 10, or 12 of them, then the likelihood that that person will become violent is high. And you must intervene at some level to reduce the risk factors.
Are there corresponding resiliency factors?
There are absolutely corresponding resiliency factors, but here's the key. Things which damage children's hearts, psyches, and ability to relate are so damaging to the children that the resiliency factors are secondary in terms of helping them cope. You've got to get rid of the toxic pieces of their lives in order for the resiliency factors to be strengthened and to grow.